Hi, I'm Colin Morgan, executive producer of Built to Sell Radio. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, you're going to absolutely love our new newsletter, Built to Sell News. We share actionable tips and insights to help you get inside the mind of an acquirer and punch above your weight when it comes time to exit. To subscribe, simply head over to builttosell.com/subscribe to sign up for free today.
Adam Kerrigan, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
How are you? Good to
I'm
see you,
great,
John.
man. Tell me, I'm excited to hear about this conversation for two reasons. One, you're a founder who has sold a company, so I'd love to kind of explore a little bit about that and then get into your world and life as an acquirer of many MSP businesses, managed service provider businesses. But start us at the beginning. Like, how did you get into the business of buying businesses? You sold a company. Describe in DevTech, what did it do and why did you sell?
Yeah. So my entire background is in IT. I did 10 years in corporate IT. And then in 2009, the Great Recession, my whole department was eliminated. So I was like, I got to do something. And I founded a IT services company, bought actually a small competitor. I'm based in Las Vegas and started building that company up, built it about over 10 years, brought on 6 or 7 staff. And in 2018, my life was not the best. A lot of friends were jealous. I said, hey, Adam's got his own business. He's growing all this stuff, but you know how it is below the surface, right? I was really struggling in a rough marriage. My health was very poor. And so, I had formed a relationship with a large local competitor and we'd been working together for a couple of years. So anyway, in 2018, ended up selling to them to join. And it really was evolutionary for my life. I lost 80 pounds. I got out of that bad marriage, got my nights and weekends back. I got into competitive powerlifting, better money, and just really am a happier person. So that was pretty transformational. Wow. But yeah, that was with Intelligent Technical Solutions.
Wow, that's a lot in one in one intro. So let me unpack that a bit. So you're struggling. You've got a successful business on the outside. It's, 8 or 9 employees, but kind of classic. I call it the kind of fog of war, where you're kind of a little bigger than a self-employed individual who can kind of choose their own hours, but you're also not big enough to have all of the infrastructure. You're in the worst of both worlds, right? Like everything is coming to you. Did you have all of the employees reporting into you at the time? Did you have managers in place?
Yeah, it's, a lot of the classic challenges, right? Like I was the cap of the business. It just could not grow past me. And what's so odd is I was really investing in myself. I was working with us industry specialists. It was focused on sales and just business ownership. But I think there was kind of a certain emotional and mental maturity that was just taking a longer time. And really, a classic area I was struggling in was sales. Had all the people reporting to me, all my technicians, all the staff, and I was just buried, right? It's the classic metaphor. People see me riding the lion, but I'm scared to death, right? and I'm putting in all this time, and and I'm thinking to myself, well, I can take off time anytime I want. I can take a vacation, but the fact is, I never did. Right. I just the balance of my life was very out of balance.
So you were kind of like, Michael Gerber, the E-Myth guy, talks about this entrepreneurial seizure where you have a technician who is the person who sort of goes from doing the work to kind of running a company that does the work. Is that sort of the spot you were in?
That book could have been written about me. Yeah, it absolutely had the entrepreneurial seizure. And then, even in running the business, I had my quarterly entrepreneurial seizure where it's like, hey, the next guy with $20 that came along, he could just have it all, right? But there was a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth, created a lot of long-lasting relationships. But ultimately, what I found is I was a limiting factor. And in spite of investing well over $100,000 into myself, my coaching, and just everything else, something was just failing to click. And I think certain things just came together when they did in that 2018. It was over a sushi lunch, with my competitor Tom, and one thing led to another.
And as you look back with the passage of time and the clarity of that, have you been able to pinpoint what what it is, what that was limiting you? You say you were the limiting factor, but go further there. Like, what specifically was your limitation?
Yeah. So by nature, I'm introverted, and as many technicians are. And one of the things that I think I misunderstood about business is that it is so about relationships. It is so much about communication. My upbringing really focused on neither one of those, and so as in retrospect, over the prior 6 years now, as I look back, was able to level up my communication, really level up my social ability, and really getting out there. And really, at the end of the day, not looking so much to just sell, my products and services, but really looking to solve people's problems. And so kind of having this mind shift, right, about, getting out there, not being afraid of people. They're just like me, right? They're trying to solve the problems. They're just doing the best that they can every single day. And the truth is, I was scared. I spent a lot of time afraid and scared of people and problems and what ifs. And like most problems, it's just in my head. And so I was living up here a little bit too much.
You were like the opposite of most entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs are like great salespeople, but like they don't know how to do the work. Like they oversell and then they got to figure out how to do the work. Yeah. You were like, it sounds like really good at the work, but you didn't love the selling part of it. Yeah. How big, if you don't mind me asking, sort of revenue wise, profitability, like where were you in the journey when you sold?
Yeah, it's a relatively small business, was approaching $1 million of revenue, about 200,000 of EBITDA. And, again, from a metrics perspective, was doing well. My growth was actually double digits, which is easier, of course, at a small company. But the pressure just kept mounting up. But I guess the growth was double digits, so was the pressure. That's ultimately what got to me.
And when, how much of that was recurring? Were you in that because I know a lot of managed service providers have moved everything over to these sort of subscription agreements.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I started the company, it's what we called break fix, all hourly, was even residential and commercial. And so in 2015, I started in 2009. So in 2015, I switched over to the MSP model, the managed services provider model, where it was more focused on recurring revenue. So I went to all my clients and started getting them on contract. I want to say it was 60% recurring of revenue. And I was really getting creative at that point. I was even doing not only managed services, but even doing like managed surveillance camera systems and things of this nature, and just looking for new ways and just, kind of being entrepreneurial and creative about bringing solutions to the table. But about 60%.
Got it. And did you have a sense of what it would be worth? Like, did Tom give you a sense of what he thought it was worth? Were you talking to other MSPs to find out like what are companies like mine?
Yeah. So that was probably, like, looking back from a technicality standpoint of approaching M&A, I made the classic mistake of talking to just one person. Right. And so immediately over lunch, he's like, "Hey, I'm actually interested." Within a week, I had an offer on the table. And so that left me scrambling to say, "Hey, what am I going to do here? I'm either going to take this offer and I really have no leverage against it, or I got to slow down and go talk to a bunch of people." Now, the truth was, where I was at is I wanted out. I really absolutely wanted out. I talked to 2 other people. One of them made me a serious offer, but ultimately ended up going with Tom. And, I wouldn't say I got the best offer. I think I got a very fair offer, which included a position with the company. And, I was happy with it. I think more than anything, that I got out from under the burden that was, just causing all the stress.
And are you able to share kind of multiple of earnings or multiple of revenue, anything that would give
Yeah. So I had a 3-year earnout, which was essentially 1 times EBITDA. So again, by most standards, it's kind of like, wow, that's about $200,000 of profit over 3 years, including a position with a company. And, I came in as a senior member. I didn't get any equity initially as a part of that, but that's something that I didn't later work into over those ensuing 6 years.
So the value Tom paid was $200,000, and he paid it through an earnout. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. Earn out over 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I had a salary, I want to say roughly 100,000 of salary. And then, so I was getting like 50 or 75,000 a year on top of that. So, I had a pretty comfortable earnings. And then, of course, the benefits that come along with being part of a large organization.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So you're at a point where it just makes sense. You want to get out. You're burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get out, and you've got this opportunity to go work for a company, and you started to kind of move into the role of buying companies, other managed service providers. I think I was reading my notes beforehand. Colin was saying you did like 16 deals. Is that right? Am I getting 16 or maybe?
Yes. So ITS in total has done 17.
Okay.
When I had come in, I was number 4.
Okay.
And, Tom was doing a lot of these just very creatively with people that he knew. And so I went over to the outside sales department, and that's really where I was able to shape and really taking that burden off and focus exclusively on my sales ability. It helped elevate my communication and my ability to just, be more social and kind of connect and break out of my shell. In 2021, Tom approached me and said, "Hey, I'd like you to stand up our M&A division. Let's do this officially now." Right. And I want to say that we were at that point close to 10 million in revenue.
Okay.
And I was like, dude, I feel like the poster child for M&A, right? As I'd mentioned, I'd lost a ton of weight, right? I was just healthier mentally, physically, emotionally, everything. And I said, I would absolutely love to do this. So from that point,
What does losing weight and being more mentally sound have to do with M&A? Just walk me through that.
Yeah. So for me, I see that, as I had done all the transactions, right? Every owner has pressure on them, a lot of stress, right? They put in a ton of hours, and they have a lot that's going on, and they're in general, their life is slanted very much towards the business.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, by taking that business ownership burden off of my shoulders, it freed up my capacity to do the things that I needed to do to get healthy. I was tremendously overweight. There was, just a lot going on. And so by freeing up my time and by creating some opportunity, some energy got freed up, I was able to just really get myself right. And so for me, I felt like that was kind of this chrysalis moment where I was able to turn from a caterpillar into a butterfly in a little bit of a way. And I loved that. And so I looked at my opportunity of selling my business as like, wow, that was the gateway. I had to go through, it was tough, right? I mean, no doubt, even though I was in a rough spot, it was a very difficult thing to walk away from that because I created it, right? That was a thing that I birthed. And so anyway, stood up the M&A department and then immediately went to work. We had nothing. I was literally just pounding phones, calling businesses, and then immediately got like 5 LOIs. And then over the next 3 years was able to end up closing 8 deals.
Wow. Okay. So because a lot of our listeners get these calls and, they're not sure what's legit and what's some, like call center in some faraway land calling them. Like, what was your approach to calling and finding business owners that wanted to sell? Like, how did you find people?
So I had to get creative, right? Now, in the MSP industry, I actually took advantage of a little bit of a loophole that's in our industry. And one of the things that goes on in our industry is it's very common to say, hey, John, I'm in Las Vegas and we have clients up in Seattle. Can you guys go out and be boots on the ground support for us, right? And that was a very common thing, and it is still today that goes on in the industry. And I call up people and say, hey, we're looking to, we've got some clients down in Phoenix, and we've really gone the boots on the ground support role in the past, but actually we're looking to open up an office. Don't know if you're interested in that sort of a thing. Now, this was in 21, 22, right? And M&A in the MSP space was still relatively new. And so it really caught a lot of people's attention. So I started doing a lot of education, just having conversations, and it just hooked. And like sales, which is really what it is at the end of the day, it was catching people at the right time, right? And because I had gone through the experience myself, I was able to talk about the challenges and the frustrations and, and just kind of having lived through it, was able to relate. And I think that's what pulled people in.
How did you segue from we're thinking of opening an office in Phoenix to would you like to sell us your business? That seems like a fairly big leap.
Yeah. So it's kind of just an exploratory question. It'd be, hey, John, we're looking to open up that office down in Phoenix. We'll take as an example. And we, as I said, we've always gone that route of just hiring a local MSP to help us out. But we're looking to make a more permanent base. And I don't know if this would be of interest to you, but do you have any interest in actually joining a larger MSP? And then I would just just have the conversation. Two of those 8 actually came from cold calls that I personally made.
And we should define MSP for our listeners outside of the tech space who maybe don't know that acronym. Can you just describe what?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So an MSP is a managed services provider. And what they do are they provide outsourced IT services for generally small and medium-sized businesses, right? Companies are usually less than 100 employees. They need IT support, but they're not big enough yet to probably hire somebody in-house.
Got it. That's helpful. And so did you have sort of a playbook like MSPs? The good news is there's fairly similar businesses. Most of them have these service contracts with their clients, so there's recurring revenue, and there's maybe a little bit of one-off stuff. Did you have a playbook in mind when you went to acquire a company? Like, did you know sort of like what the criteria was for who you were going after, what the kind of offer you were prepared to make them was?
Yeah. So in the early days, it was before we brought in private equity, it was very much run and gun. We were out. So I was out there just shotgunning, just calling every MSP that I could get in the phone book and find online. And really what we were looking for is companies that were probably north of $1 million of revenue, that were profitable, had, at least half of their revenue was recurring, right? We had very kind of flexible criteria in the beginning. And really what we were simply looking to do at that point was to do what we had already done. We wanted to add on revenue, add on profitability in a region that we might have had a foothold, right? We're all West Coast focused up to that point. And we just wanted to continue to expand. We felt like we were very good at sales, very good operationally, internally. And so if we could get a foothold, then we could just build on top of that.
And what was the strategic goal here? Was there,
Sure.
Was Tom looking to sell the entire business for a higher multiple than you were buying businesses, or was it economies of scale? Like what was his sort of strategic?
Yeah. So at that point in 2021, we were about 10 million of revenue. And at the end of 2021, we actually brought together and did a 3-way merger, which brought together San Francisco and Detroit. And that brought us to about 22 million of revenue, about 4.2 million of EBITDA. And the plan was, hey, we're going to go and take private equity investment, which is exactly what happened in May of 2022. And in doing so, which is very common in most service-based industries, is, hey, we want to create this kind of retirement path, the whole second bite of the apple opportunity, where we're going to take some chips off the table. That's the first bite, right? And then we're going to reinvest about 25% of our equity, build for the next 4, 5, 6 years, and then take those chips off the table. That's the second bite of the apple. And at 22 million of revenue, we said, hey, we know our goal. We set our goal with our private equity firm to be 100 million of revenue, 20 million of EBITDA.
And were you a shareholder?
I became a shareholder after private equity entered the picture.
Got it. Okay. So let's just rewind the clock here. Before the private equity group, you're in the kind of run and gun sort of style.
Correct.
You're calling people up. Got it. Okay. And what are you offering them for their business? Because you sold at a fairly you were wanting to get out. So did you have a multiple in mind, or how did you structure the deals?
So prior to private equity coming in, all the deals were either very value-based, kind of like in my situation, or were entirely cashless. They were all equity plays. Like, hey, here's the pie. You're going to get X number of shares, and here's the game plan. We're going to kind of roll in to this first and second bite of the apple play. So people were, coming in at a fair valuation of their business and then getting just kind of an equity portion of the larger pie. It was all cashless.
How did you value the businesses for the purposes of figuring out how big the slice of the pie they got?
We were using some industry valuation services that focus specifically on tech services. So we could kind of get a general sense of what the businesses were valued at. So for instance, when we went into that three-way merger, we had this company, IT Valuations, they valued each independently, and then they valued us entirely together. So that really kind of gave us a lay of the land.
Okay. So but when you're buying a company in this cashless model, so are you using, at some point, you've got this firm that's doing these valuations. Do you know if they are using a multiple of EBITDA or a multiple of revenue, or what's their?
Yeah. Multiples of EBITDA is really the name of the game. And most of the businesses were under 500,000 of EBITDA. So they're somewhere in the 2 to 4, possibly 5x range on that EBITDA. And of course, it varies depending on profitability, recurring revenue, some of your standard metrics. Yeah.
So the pitch is, look, we're a $10 million company. We're putting $2 million to the bottom line. You guys are a $1 million company and you're putting $200,000 to the bottom line. So, you get effectively 10% of the collective.
That is correct. When you come in. Yep.
Okay. And so how does it work when you start to acquire additional businesses? So if I agree to that deal, right, and say, okay, I'll go from being the majority of the exclusive owner of my business to being kind of a minority owner in a larger business, because I think, the prospects for this larger business are better. And do I have any say on who we start to acquire? Like, if you start to acquire more businesses, presumably the pie's getting split up in among more and more people. Do I get any sort of opportunity to vet who you're thinking about approaching? Or
it's a solid question. As the CEOs began to come in, and just before we took private equity, we'd end up doing our 8th and 9th transactions, right? So you got a fair number of owners kind of in the mix. Some of the owners ended up moving on, right? One wanted to build a SaaS company, one wanted to get into real estate. But what we were finding is that people pretty much had an understanding, hey, Tom is going to remain the CEO, right? He's driving the company. Of course, giving up that CEO hat is one of the tougher psychological things that we all faced. But people were really asked to say, hey, let's get you picked to a lane within the business. Maybe it's sales, maybe it's operations, and let's have you focus there, right? People able to express their concerns. They could say, hey, here's what I think would be best for ITS. But we didn't really have like a board of directors or anything like that that was really driving. It was like, hey, here's the mission. We're going to each have our own role, our own seat on the bus. And this is really where we're going to focus our energy. And then Tom was very clear about, hey, this is the vision. We're just going to keep building towards this. And, the core values that we had at the company are really what drove they were the gateway of like, hey, who's coming in, who's going to pass the litmus test of being able to join the team.
How did what was the reaction, I guess, is my actual question of an entrepreneur to the cashless deal? I'm a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this sort of vision of, well, when I sell, it's, I'm going to get a huge check and I'm going to run off into the sunset and that's my plan. Right. I'd imagine they must have been disappointed when you're like, yeah, well, we're going to buy your business, but we're going to give you shares and you're going to go to work for us.
It became a serious challenge, right? It became a serious challenge because a lot of the initial partnerships that had come together were heavily based on trust. Like they were peers, people that had, these were owners. We kind of knew each other for many years. And so as we branched out as I was literally cold calling into places, trust is very low. Right? They don't know, right? They don't know me from Adam, as the saying goes, right?
Yeah.
And so they were saying, hey, we had to approach it a little bit differently. And one of the drivers for why we ended up going to private equities were like, look, we knew that the transactions really past mine, we're going to have some cash. And to do that, it needed to be significant. We weren't quite to a point where we could cash flow a couple $1 million. And the challenge is we went to banks, and the banks would say, well, hey, no problem. We can give you a loan for like $5 or $10 million. And we're like, wait a second, we only need 2 or 3 million. And they're saying, sorry, that's below our thresholds. So we're kind of stuck in this no man's land of, we wanted to be able to put cash up to buy these businesses, but the cost of borrowing that level of, money was extreme. And so we were kind of really stuck in this kind of space. And just as you said, yeah, owners, they're thinking, hey, I put in decades of work. I want to be able to sell the business, and I want to go home. And so it goes one of two ways. You go home and you tell your wife, hey, guess what? I sold the business. She's like, great. Where's all the money? Well, I just have this sheet of paper that says I have some shares. That doesn't go over too well.
Yeah, but how did you overcome that? Because you did do some deals before the private equity.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what it came down to, is those deals had very high trust. Either we had worked together for a number of years, like even in my situation, I had collaborated with some clients with ITS for 2 years, met them in 2016, and then joined them in 2018. And it was kind of similar. So there was a lot of trust. And even in the space, even in the MSP industry, this is very commonly what I see happening is peer group members are starting to come together, right? They've got high trust. They have a good feel for culture. They know each other, and they want so they want to come together. But the challenge is nobody really has the money to pay each other. So they come in together, they split the pie up, and then they grow to a point where a strategic buyer such as ITS can actually pay them, or they get it to sufficient size where they can become a platform and private equity buys them.
And what is you went through this, so you can probably speak to firsthand, but there's so many benefits of being your own boss and not having anyone to answer to, and having all the equity, making all the decisions. Like, it sounds like a bad deal. So what are they seeing when they see this idea of joining up with somebody else, sharing equity, pooling the equity, not getting, like, what is it that is attractive about that?
Yeah. No, that's it. So the obvious view of it is, hey, it's going to help relieve some of your stress. I think case in point myself, right? What M&A does, though, is there's kind of this magical thing where it helps accelerate time. And so what I mean by that is, let's take a business. Let's say you're doing 5 million of revenue in the MSP industry, best in class profitability, 20%. So let's say you're doing 5 million of revenue, 1 million of EBITDA, right? At a million of EBITDA, you're probably going to get a 6, maybe even 7x valuation, right? Now, by coming into a even bigger company, right? By selling that equity into, say, a company that's doing 10, 15, 20 million of EBITDA, there's an arbitrage, right? Bigger companies value higher. And so if you have that $5 million company, you join and hitch your wagon to a bigger company, you stick around for a couple of years, the equity that you reinvested in that second bite of the apple is going to grow, right? And it's going to grow very quickly, and it may even surpass what you got on the first bite of the apple. And so what it does there is it allows people to accelerate their time to retire. And that's the trick, is in the MSP community, a lot of guys, I go to all these conferences, I look around and I see two things, a lot of bald heads and gray hair, right? These guys are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're like, I'm not quite big enough where if I sold, I could get the millions that I need or really want to retire. And so M&A is a methodology by which you can accelerate time and really boost the valuation that you're going to get at the end of the day.
Got it. So that arbitrage, in your example, let's say it's $5 million business, $1 million of EBITDA. You think it might get these days around 6x EBITDA.
Yeah.
What would the $20 million EBITDA attract these days? Like, what kind of multiple would that business get?
Yeah. You're talking a significant difference. When we were looking at our goal, 100 million revenue, 20 million EBITDA, we're figuring high teens. 15, 16, 17x.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And there was even talk that at 25 million of EBITDA, you could approach 20x returns.
Wow. Okay. So there is, to your point, you use the word arbitrage. There is an arbitrage here. So you sell a tranche at say 6x.
Yep.
You roll some of that equity or all of it, in some cases, into a larger deal with a view that the collection might detract 15, 16, 17 times EBITDA.
Yep.
Got it. And that's because bigger companies, we had Adam Coffey on last year and did a great job describing, bigger companies attracting bigger multiples in virtually every industry. So that's interesting. That's interesting. What is what's the fly in the ointment in the model? Like, when does it not work?
Well, let's see. How much time do you have?
Much as you want.
Yeah, no. I think the challenge is that when people are running their company, I'll speak for the MSP industry. Just this year alone, I've talked to over 300 MSPs, strictly for the purposes of, hey, we want to buy your business. And in 99% of them, it's probably safe to say that these people built this business from the ground up. They were like me, a career technician, and they're very connected with their people and with their clients. And I think one of the unspoken things that is kind of swept under the carpet and really is a big fear of owners is what's going to happen to your people and your clients. And you alluded to it a little bit ago, John, of, when you give up control, how much say do you have? And the reality is, if you sell to a strategic, if you sell to a private equity firm, it's probably going to be significantly less than you used to have. And I think what most people fail to understand is that the objective of the game probably on the surface feels the same, right? It's to be profitable, it's to have a successful business. But the rules change a bit, and people aren't ready for that, right? People want to make sure that their team have a job, right? And they want to make sure that their clients are treated with great service and quality relationships. And I think the reality is both of those, because you no longer have control, those things will change. There's a strong likelihood that they will change, and you might not like what happens. And so being prepared for that, right? Knowing that there's going to be decisions made that you might not agree with, but that are going to proceed. There's going to be decisions that are made where you're outside the room and your people and clients may not be there a year from now. And I think mentally and emotionally, a lot of people aren't ready for that. And it really does catch some people by surprise.
At what point, if at all, do you share that with the potential acquisition target? Like, is that something that you talk to them about, or you'd wait till the deal is signed and you're going through integration and you're like, hey man, let's go for a beer. I want to tell you how this is going to, like at what point do you sort of reveal
it's such a tightrope of a thing to walk, right? What I wanted to avoid was having somebody go through the transaction, go through the difficult of due diligence, right? And then close the deal, get the money wired to them, and then break trust and say, hey, guess what? Everything I told you is a lie, right? My approach is, hey, I want to be as transparent up front. I want to inform people of what can happen, right? And what I found is that when I was having those honest conversations, right, as early as possible in our meetings to really let people know, like, hey, here, I'm going to tell you what we actually see. Right. I'm going to tell you the type of things that can happen, not just what you want to hear, but I want to tell you what's going to be, I think, real, right? Based on the partnerships that we've done. It might not be what people want to hear, but I think they viewed it as authentic. And so I think that it built trust. Because look, if, it's a classic scenario, right? You're talking to a salesperson. He's telling you everything that you want to hear. Something's off, right? It's a little bit too good to be true. I think ultimately what owners want to know, what sellers want, is they want to know that people are going to try to keep as many of your employees. They're going to try to keep the relationships and the service as high as possible for the clients. And that if changes are going to happen, that there's conversations, there's communication about that as well in advance as possible. Because, frankly, these owners, these sellers, they spend oftentimes more hours in the day with their employees than they do with their own family. They want them treated well.
But it is a fine line, I'm sure, because there's a bit of a dance where your job is to attract them, to want them to sell to you,
not scare them away.
So you can't like on the first date tell them all the bad things, and but you found that at some point during the courting process, being honest just increased your trust factor with the potential acquisition.
Yeah, 100%. And and look, because we had a number of partners, having them be able to speak with those that had gone through it, not just taking my word, even though I had gone through it, right? Kind of brought my team in, but also bringing others to the table saying, hey, talk to this partner, right? And, and not being afraid of even talking about some of maybe what some people might consider the skeletons. I would say, some of the partners that were very unhappy after the fact. And there were some that we, in fact, even had to ask to leave because they just became just really unwieldy and just, had a lot of negativity. And that was tough, especially when it's expressed.
Tell me about someone you had to exit from the business.
Yes.
Obviously leave the name out. But,
yeah, of course. For sure. Yeah. So we had a partner who had come in, and this was a multi-year thing. We talked and I had really brought them in, closed the transaction, getting through due diligence and everything else. And as things unraveled, this individual really struggled with unwinding of his psychology as the owner, being the person in control. And the way that he ended up expressing this was through kind of public outbursts, a lot of just very coarse language, just being openly saying, hey, I regret, this was a mistake for me to do this in public forums, and really causing just a lot of problems, frankly. Communication was very poor. And, something I do admire about Tom being our CEO, he's an extremely patient man, and he works with people. He tries to turn them, as it can, takes time. Ultimately, things just failed to make the dots connect. And so we had to ask this individual to depart the company. And so, so he ended up retiring. And yeah.
And in that case, what happens to the shares he invested in your group?
Yeah, well, so the good news for him is that the shares stay involved and that he'll continue to take place in that arbitrage that continues to grow. Now, for the partners who remain behind, it's a little bit of a frustration. Mentally, it feels like, hey, we're helping this guy out, and he's not really helping us back. But
right.
I think that's just one perspective. I think, look, the reality is he did something. He brought a very successful, profitable company. Maybe he's not with us today, but that's okay, right? That's just how this game goes.
Right, of course, because he would be benefiting from all the work of all the rest of the partners.
That's correct.
Yeah. And do the partners that sell, again, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of our listeners who are looking to sell their companies, do they get any say in when and how you sell the kind of rolled up entity, the mothership? Like, do they get any influence on that? Because of course, I'm assuming most of them are like, clock's ticking, man. Like, I want to get my second bite. Like, do they have any way to sort of influence that? Do they get any sort of put options where they would have the ability to sell their shares? Anything like that?
Yeah. So a couple of things I hear there. So one is like, hey, what if somebody does want to exit? Right. Yeah. I mean, it's because it's a private, it's not like the stock market, right? You can just sell your shares. Now, did we know what our shares were worth? Yeah, we knew what they were on a quarterly basis, but there's a very limited number of people that you can sell them to, and you're probably not going to get top value for them, right? And now we've not had anybody go that route. And so then the question, your main question was like, well, hey, what say do people have in terms of when we exit? Well, because private equity entered the picture, right? They purchased the majority of ITS, and as is very common, right? They usually buy about 2/3 or more of controlling interest in a company, and so therefore they are really the ones that are in control, right? They're the ones that are on the board. They are driving the decisions, and so it's going to be their say, because they have a controlling interest in the entity. So, but to your point, yes, the partners, they want to sell as quickly as possible, right? I think they do feel that ticking time, because they want to get on with the next chapter, whether it's retirement, whether it's consulting, doing something else. So they want organic growth to be good. They want M&A to be going good because a lot of work has to happen to get to 100 million.
Got it. So I want to talk about how private equity changed the game. So, and DevTech was your company. You sold it to ITS.
Yep.
ITS was owned by Tom.
Mm-hmm.
ITS acquired other friendly businesses, partners that you had along the way. And then private equity bought the majority of ITS. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And so Tom got some cash, but also was asked, I'm assuming, to roll some equity into the larger deal.
Mm-hmm.
As was, I'm assuming, the other partners that sold to ITS. Did they get the same terms that Tom got?
So because I was not a partner at the time, I was frankly in the dark about some of the details there.
Got it.
But what I can say about this is the private equity model, at least in the MSP industry, is pretty much a proven theory. And so every single partner that had equity rolled the maximum amount. They really believe in the model. That second bite, it's just like clockwork. And every partner that I brought in after the fact also did the very same thing. In fact, most of them said, "Hey, can I roll everything?" And they said, "No, you can't do that. How about 50%? No, sorry. It was about 25% was the limit."
Got it. Okay. So they were invited to roll some equity into this sort of established model. Again, they might have sold for, depending on the size of their company, but it could have been 2 or 3, 4 times EBITDA. If they were a little bigger, it might have been as much as 6 times EBITDA.
Correct.
And the goal was, hey, let's make this collection worth 15, 16, 17 times one day down the road.
Yeah.
Got it. How did private equity ownership change your role? Like you were in the early days, to use your own vernacular, kind of run and gun and kind of a bit of a renegade, whatever, like up by the bootstraps. How did it change with private equity ownership?
Yeah. So, a lot more structure, right? Certainly came in because their thesis is really going to be the driver. And what I mean by that is they want a certain outcome, and they have a certain history of the way that they have done deals in the past. And so now suddenly that burden was on me to learn how to accomplish that, right? So I talked earlier about, hey, we were pretty loose in kind of the financials, the size, even the locations. All that started to tighten up as private equity came into the picture. Now, I was working very closely with them, meeting every single week. Our particular group, they were very involved in the M&A process. My job was primarily corporate development, build the relationship, kind of bring the people to the table, and then help guide them through the due diligence process, right?
Very similar to Randy Woods, by the way.
Yeah.
Almost the same model. Randy, for those of our listeners who may recognize that name, actually put Adam and I in touch. Randy had a very similar role. He sold his company to a sort of a larger private equity backed group, and then sort of was the front end corporate development person, attracting potential acquisition targets. But when it got to the kind of nitty gritty negotiation, it was sort of passed off. Was it the same in your case, where you're not getting into the actual hardcore negotiation?
Yeah, that is accurate. So our private equity deal team was the one that was typically in those conversations, working with the seller, their attorney, their advisor, and so. But my job was to help, kind of keep the seller together, right? Sometimes peel them off the wall, pull them back from the edge, help keep them together from a relationship standpoint, and then kind of getting them to the finish line, and then bringing them in, handing them off to our integration team.
And what would cause an owner to start to get cold feet?
We had actually last year, we did have a deal fall apart about a month before close. We had a phenomenal business that we were looking at on the West Coast, and very strong relationship. And they kind of say like, hey, every deal dies 3 times, right? What I found was that at every point, especially in due diligence, so meaning you've signed the LOI, the letter of intent, you're in this like 60 to 90 day period of before closing. And during that period, I find that there's some moment, some hurdle emotionally where every person has to get over that hurdle. And if they trip up and they fail to really get over and remain committed to their decision to sell, they will back out. And in this situation, that's what happened. So with this gentleman, we were talking, and he said, "Hey, you know what? This just isn't working for me. I think I want more money. I'm gonna back out." So Tom and I got on the phone with him. We talked with him for about 30 minutes. Really got him recommitted. And we're like, "Okay, you're sure you're good? We're gonna proceed with this." Yes, Adam. Yes, Tom. We're gonna do this. And we said, "Okay, you're sure? 100%. Yes, we are." We hang up, and 20 minutes later, he texted us, "I'm out." And it was tough, right? It's a very emotional thing. And we've stayed in great contact since. I think there's still an opportunity later, but it just kind of goes to show that sometimes, people just aren't ready.
And sorry, what's your diagnosis of that situation? Because on one hand, it sounds like you and Tom got him over the finish line. He committed. Yeah. Okay. And then 20 minutes later, you get a text. So like, what happened in that 20 minutes?
I wonder about that. I think what actually created the wedge leading up to all that drama happening was he had opened up to his peer group about his offer, and the feedback, the little bit that I was able to glean is that his peer group was unimpressed, and I think that caused him to question the deal and the value. Now, the challenge there is this advice was coming from people who've not ever done their own transaction, right? It's coming from people who have these magical views of valuation. And I think I'm worth 10x because I heard about another guy that got bought for 10x, right? So there's all this, it is a struggle, right? It is a balance. And I think that's the risk that maybe when you go to people for advice, are these people in the right seat, right? Do they have the experience? Do they have your best interest? Do they know where they're speaking from in giving you that advice? I don't want to say they don't. That would be probably an overstep on my part, but it's something that's certainly a risk.
Yeah. So when you hear that an entrepreneur is in a peer group, does that shoot up a red flag for you and say, "Oh, here we go"?
No, actually, in most cases, I think it's a confidence booster. And in fact, from an M&A perspective, it's like, hey, maybe there's even opportunity for us to grab some of your peers. But I think it's there's you mentioned about EO there. It's my understanding there's a concept about your top and bottom 5%. And I've even heard people talk about your top and bottom 1%. It's
I'm not familiar with that.
So in life, right, we have our top and bottom 5%, right? It's like if I made $1 million last year, there's probably very few people that I'm going to tell that to, and certainly not just casual friends, because it's going to introduce some information into the relationship which could be damaging. Mm-hmm. I wonder if sharing in a peer group situation openly with the entire peer group, if it was maybe a wrong call to share that openly, and maybe to pick some select people who'd been through a transaction to maybe share that more discreetly to get feedback. I think it's just one of those things. Hey, when you share broadly, you're going to get broad feedback, and it's just an emotional, selling your business is a very emotional thing to talk about. And so putting it out there, people are going to criticize it. They really don't have any skin in the game. So what's to hold them back?
Yeah. What are the red flags? Like when you're looking at buying a business and you hear something or see something that makes you kind of question things, what are the biggest red flags for you?
Yeah, I think people talk about culture being the number one, right, criteria for coming together. And I think, for instance, the gentleman that I shared about with that was very openly kind of negative and was having some challenges. I sometimes wonder if we really had both eyes open with that deal, right? In terms of, hey, is this actually a great culture fit? Now, I think the good news is that the team that has come in has been phenomenal. I'll give you another red flag is we had an owner who wanted to exit very quickly. And normally we like to say, hey, can you stick around for a year? And he said, no, absolutely not. I'm going to be here for 6 months. And we say, okay, can we get 9 out of you? So we settled on 9 months. Well, 2 months in, after closing the deal, he wanted out. And he let us know, and here's the real red flag. It wasn't the timeline. The real red flag is he said, "Hey, I don't want anybody to know until I leave." Now, in our thrill of getting the deal done, we went along with that. That was a red flag we flat out ignored. Well, 2 months in, when he decided to leave much sooner than anticipated, that created a lot of problems for us because the staff, the clients came to us and said, "Hey, wait a second, you said he was going to stay. He's gone. How can we trust you about anything else?" So we had a lot of damage to repair, some relationships. We ended up losing a client or two over that, but it was a good lesson for us that secrets. I mean, things can be confidential, but keeping things secret probably not the best idea.
How did the deal structure change after private equity bought ITS? Because early there was no cash. It was just, hey, let's roll this up and all kind of for one for all kind of thing.
Yeah.
How did it change when you had private equity backing?
Yeah. So when private equity came in, it was a chance to kind of reset the cap table, right? A partner or two, they were bought out. And so from that point, private equity came in, they own the majority of the controlling shares. And then based on how that original pie was, so Tom being the, kind of the founder, the highest equity owner, he then kind of slotted in as number two, and then so on for each ensuing shareholder all the way down the line.
I guess what I was more asking about, how did it change the way you acquired companies? Like you mentioned, with private equity backing, you were able to start paying some cash.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So going back to the example, so I don't know what it is, but when a private equity company is now your owner, suddenly banks want to talk to you. They're happy to lend you whatever number of millions you need, whether it's small or large.
Yeah.
Look, private equity makes money better than anybody in the game. And so financial institutions are very interested in bringing their assets. So in the deals that we're doing now, they are 100% cash up front with an option to reinvest equity. Now there's some nuance there about a holdback, 10% for a year, but most of the deals, with one exception, every single owner took maximum equity opportunity to kind of reinvest. Again, as the one gentleman, he wanted to immediately retire, no problem. We let him out, but everybody else reinvested that full equity.
Yeah, and the multiples you're paying are in that kind of 2 to 4 range for around a couple $100,000 in EBITDA.
Yeah, so the criteria is higher. Private equity wants to do bigger deals, right? And from an integration standpoint, just about as much work is going to go into buying a 500,000 EBITDA company as it is to buy a 2 million EBITDA company. So let's buy one of those larger ones. So the deal sizes that we were looking at, optimally a million of EBITDA or higher, in the range of 5 to 7x is generally the range. Yeah. And again, it was cash up front, which is great for the sellers because it helps them realize, right, kind of that liquidity event, get some cash off the table.
Yeah. And then they can reinvest. I think you said 25%.
20, yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Got it. With the view that one day that might be worth more.
And it's also more palatable for them, right? Because they're actually coming home with cash, right? They've put in decades. They're feeling better. They can actually do this. And one of the piece of advice that we even offer to people is like, look, no investment is guaranteed, right? Make that first bite enough, right? If you have to have that second bite, there's some risk, right? Look, private equity is good, but there's no guarantees.
Yeah. And of course, you don't know when that second bite will come. Obviously,
that's
everybody
correct.
hopes it'll be sooner than later, but it could be years later, a decade. It could be
or it may never happen.
Yeah. That's sage advice for sure. Got it. So I'd imagine as you move up market, these businesses with $1 and $2 million of EBITDA, the competitive landscape changes quite considerably because everybody wants those companies. There's lots of private equity, deals, guys chasing those those $1 and $2 million EBITDA MSPs, how do you think about competing for a transaction? Because there are some acquirers, when they learn there are other potential bidders, they just walk. They say, like, we're not going to get into some sort of competition or auction process. Sure. Others are like, no, it's just the kind of name of the game. Where did you guys land on competing for a deal?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And anecdotally, it felt like anybody that had $1 million of EBITDA or higher kind of just inherently knew, hey, I've got a very valuable asset here, right? They were more likely to retain an advisor, more likely to go and auction a competitive process. And so from a buyer standpoint, I actually really encourage people to get an advisor because frankly, they just help the successfulness of a transaction go up. But because there's so much competition, private equity firms, family investment trusts, we're even seeing insurance companies, CPAs, and law firms buying MSPs. So there's so many buyers coming in that as soon as an asset comes on market, there's a ton of interest. And so it naturally drives up the price. Great for the seller, bad for the buyer, but just flat out a lot of competition. And so I think what it comes down to for most people is, what's the relationship, right? Is there something of there? Do your core values align? Is your culture good? Are your objectives, is the type of integration, whether it's minimal or full integration, are those things aligning with what you ultimately want for your company?
You talked about values, and I want to push a little bit there because I've read Jim Collins' stuff, and he would have you believe that values are a delicate alchemy. It's a chemistry that is very, very precious, never touched, or it doesn't evolve. It lasts the life of the company. Every culture, like a DNA of a business, is different. Like a human being, like there are no two people that are exactly identical. And so you talk about, quote, cultural alignment. And I get that theoretically. I think we all kind of understand at a high level, but no two cultures can align perfectly. Like, how did you enforce your cultural values on another company? Even if you were notionally aligned on the big things, you couldn't have been aligned on everything.
Oh, yeah, you're 100%. And I think there's a very organic nature, right? Companies are made up of people. We're just organic beings. And so ITS's approach to that was a lot of patience, letting individual regions have their own flavor. For instance, we had a branch in Washington State. They love to do a monthly barbecue. And we're like, great, that's unique to you guys, but keep doing that, right? As an entire entity, every morning we do a daily huddle where it's all hands on deck. We've got about 250 people plus. And so we're talking about our core values. We're checking in about clients. And so there's kind of this percolation of the culture from a higher corporate perspective, but in such a way that it's not designed to stamp out what is there. I will say one thing in retrospect, I think that could be done a little bit better is I just finished a great book, Transitions by William Bridges. And in there, he talks, there's 3 parts to any transition. It begins with an ending, there's a neutral zone, and then there is a beginning. And when a company is sold, its identity ends. And I think too few people actually say, hey, yes, we need to end the way that some things are done. We need to navigate this transition together, and then we need to begin a new way of doing things. I think a lot of times people are just kind of left to their own devices, and it ends up burning a lot of energy. It causes a lot of employee turnover. And so recognizing that a transition is happening, that an end has occurred, that's a very critical thing.
And I'd imagine a very emotional, challenging for the sellers, or especially around naming. How did you guys approach changing the name of the company? You were originally in DevTech, I believe, right? In DevTech. Did you eventually sunset that name and adopt the ITS brand?
Yeah, it's funny. Branding is one of those very polarizing things. Some people, they don't care at all, funny enough. And then some people are like, no, absolutely, this is my number one requirement, this stay around. With ITS, we're very transparent. Look, we're coming under one brand, one marketing image. And so over time, usually over about 3 to 6 months, your brand will get phased out. Right. In the beginning on the invoices, for instance, they'll say, hey, here's ABC Company. And then about a month, it's going to say ABC Company powered by ITS. And then a few months later, it's just going to say ITS. So look, most people understand that sort of thing is going to happen. They resolve themselves that like, hey, you know what, as long as my people, my clients are still being taken care of, I'm okay with letting that identity go.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that's very sensitive. And have you ever bought a company with someone's surname in the name of the business?
Ooh, that's a good question. In the 17, I don't think we ever encountered that actually.
Yeah, that's surprisingly.
Yeah.
Because of course, when your surname is in the company name,
I'm getting erased.
Well, you obviously have to. You feel like your family name is at stake.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to live up to the values of the family name, then that entrepreneur probably wants to get rid of their name in the name of the company.
Yeah.
But that's a very emotional decision for that business owner.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Protecting that identity. Ensuring your reputation. That's huge. And
you show up at the golf course and your name is on the door. Maybe you don't own it and don't control it anymore. And one of your golf buddies has had a bad experience with your company. It can be very embarrassing, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm just using golf as an example, but you obviously you're a pillar of the community. You sponsor the T-ball tournament, and all of a sudden you're not controlling the customer experience anymore because you've sold private equity. It can be it can create a lot of conflict, and so one to talk about maybe in another episode. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think obviously you've had a tremendous amount of experience in this one industry, MSPs, but interestingly, it parallels and echoes a lot of the other conversations we've had with other industry specialists. So I think there's some great learning, regardless of whether people are in the IT services space. I think they can learn a lot from your experience, both kind of pre-private equity and post. And I think it's such a unique opportunity. I'm super grateful for you sharing.
Yeah,
Is there a place, Adam, where people can reach out? I mean, are you a LinkedIn guy or?
Yeah, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where it's at. I got my email, phone number, all the goodies over there.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes at Built to Sell, so folks can grab that and if they want to reach out, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Adam, thanks for doing this.
John, hey, great to be here. Bye now.